Well, to get more on this and the conflict in Iran is someone who knows an awful lot, I think it's fair to say, about geopolitics and about this kind of thing. The former UK ambassador to the US, Sir Peter Westmacott, great to have you here.
Good morning, Sophie.
It's said that the question that we should all ask at the beginning of these kind of conflicts is, tell me how this ends. Do you think that question's been asked?
I think it's been asked by a lot of people. I don't think any of us are seeing any good answers to it. Normally speaking, if you're going to embark on an exercise like this, and we had the same debate 20 years ago in Iraq, how does this end? Where do we go after the easy bit, the military part? You need to have some sort of answers. There weren't good answers in Iraq, and there's no evidence that the White House has produced answers to those questions or even asked them, because we haven't had the case made to Congress, we haven't had the case made to the United Nations Security Council, we haven't had the case made to the American people, really, that there is a good reason for America to go to war and launch all these attacks. They've talked about the threat of nuclear weapons, but a few days earlier, America was saying, well, actually, no, there isn't an imminent threat, even if the Iranians are trying to start enrichment again. They've talked a bit about missiles, but the missiles, they are rebuilding their missiles after a lot of them were destroyed in the 12-day war back in June. But, where is the strong case for doing this? And it looks like it's regime change, and to some extent, a little bit of a vanity project, because remember that President Trump promised the Iranian people he would be with them if they took to the streets. Tens of thousands were slaughtered by the Khamenei regime before he was killed, and Iran and America did nothing. So there's probably an element of wanting to look a little bit better. But then what? We've now got rid of Khamenei. The president has said, oh, well, the guys we had in mind to take over seem to be dead now, so we've got to think again about a new leadership. The Iranians were ready for this. They knew that Khamenei was either going to be killed or was going to die of natural causes. He was 86 years old, after all. They've got this interim council of 3 people. They're going to work out who is the definitive successor. Is it going to be another, theocratic Ayatollah type? Don't know. Or will it be more revolutionary guards who could be pragmatic, could be more interested in survival and wealth and stability and prosperity for themselves than ideology? We just don't know. But so the answer to your question, I'm afraid, is that I'm not sure those questions have been adequately asked, and they certainly haven't been adequately answered.
Have you been surprised or not, Peter, by, again, on both sides, the seeming success of the US attacks so far and their might and ability, and on the other side, the lack of success from Iran's response, or are we understating that, or is there more to come?
I don't think it's been surprising how well militarily the Americans have done. It is a fantastically effective machine. Donald Trump says he's rebuilt the military single-handed, and that may be an exaggeration, but they are very good at this stuff. We saw what they did in Venezuela, slightly high risk, but brilliant execution. And they and the Israelis, who've got a lot of the really key intelligence about the targets and who to hit and where they are and who's having breakfast in which bunker, so on, that is clear from their previous outings. So, no, I'm not particularly surprised by the success of the military operations. I'm a little bit surprised that nobody really knows how successful the bunker busters were back in June in destroying the enrichment facilities. No one's quite clear how damaged they are. Are they obliterated? Or is there still half a ton of highly enriched uranium, which could eventually be made into a bomb? Nobody seems to be clear about that. But no, I think militarily, not a surprise, nor was the timing. We all knew it was going to happen in the next few days. There was a question, was it Saturday, was it Sunday, was it daylight, was it nighttime? And so they have done an extraordinary job. What I'm a little surprised about is that the Iranians, who clearly have had some time since last June, but that's not very long. Imagine what we would do in 9 months, here in the UK, if we had to rebuild our military defence facilities. They've launched hundreds of missiles. I'm sorry they've done it, the Gulf states, the poor Gulf states who are innocent in this. But, in Abu Dhabi, which is not known for its military prowess, they've shot down, about 95% of the missiles and drones that have been launched at them with their own anti-aircraft defence kit. That has surprised me, that they've done so well. Of course, there have been some booms, there have been a few strikes on hotels and ports, and that's worrying for tourism, it's worrying for markets, it's worrying for trade. But that has surprised me, that the Gulfies have done so well, with some American help, of course, in if you like, not fighting back, but seeing off some of those missile attacks that the Iranians have thrown at them.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Can I ask you a bit about the UK response? Because it's a tough one for Keir Starmer, right? Like, we talked about it a lot on the programme today. Initially saying that absolutely not getting involved at all, we're going to refuse any request to use the bases. That position's changed. They're now allowing the US to use the bases.
Yeah.
Is that the right political calculation?
I think the first reaction, which I noticed that Defence Secretary John Healey didn't really want to deal with in the Sunday shows, was that under international law, it was not legitimate to launch this attack, and therefore the Brits wouldn't be involved, and we could not allow the Americans to use British bases, which are, of course, very important for them in operations in the Middle East. I think a lot of people were rather rude about that, especially the conservatives on the far right, was saying, this is pathetic, why don't we support our allies? Well, I think the lawyers were looking at it and saying it's very hard to argue this is justifiable. And remember that all the previous things, whether it's Iraq or Syria or Libya, whichever British government it has, they've had to ask themselves the same question of the law officers. Is this legal or is it not? If it is, okay. If it's not, if we haven't got the United Nations Security Council or international law or self-defense, you can't do it. So it's not new and it's not different. We do have a lawyer as Prime Minister, so it's not surprising he should look at it in that way. Now, I think the calculation has changed. Some unkind souls will say this is another U-turn, but actually because we have now had attacks on British interests from Iranians, then it becomes an issue of self-defense. And now I think it's legally much more clear-cut and it's politically not difficult. So I think it's the right call. It happens to make the relationship with the United States, I suspect, easier because we're no longer saying to them that you can't use your bases for defensive purposes. So the Iranian attacks have made that slightly easier.
I'm interested, do you think the net effect will be an easier relationship rather than the lack of permission in the first place damaging the relationship? Does it not make the US think that general point that they've had for some years now, perhaps unfounded, that we always have to do all the hard work and you guys don't step up when needed?
I think it is a problem. But over the years, they have made extensive use of places like Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford and different Ascension Island, different facilities that we have made available to them. And very rarely has the United Kingdom government had to say to them, sorry, can't do that, because our law officers say that it is not possible. When I was ambassador in Washington, we had a tricky problem because President Obama wanted to bomb Syria over the use of chemical weapons in 2013. It wasn't so much the law officers, but Parliament said, you know what, we're not going along with this. And there was a moment of rupture there. In fact, from President Obama's point of view, who then went to Congress, who said, we haven't got the votes either, Mr. President, they decided to do something different. So this has been around for a while. We are extremely forthcoming in terms of the facilities we make available to the Americans around the world for defense purposes. But they are used to the fact that we have to apply international law over the use. And very rarely is there a problem. So I would like to think that this will not be an issue of lasting damage. What it may have done is made it more difficult for the Americans to go along with the extremely complex Diego Garcia deal, which is still stuck in the weeds somewhere, or in the upper house of the House of the House of Lords committees. That may be a problem, because he lashed out on Diego Garcia after he was told that, sorry, you can't use this for offensive purposes, you can only use it for defensive. But I'm hoping that in the longer term it doesn't actually do any material damage to the perceptions of the UK as a reliable ally.
Thank you so much. It's been so interesting to talk, as always. Honestly, we could have talked all day, but I'm sure we'll get you back on in the coming weeks.
And remember the insurance thing about your shipping point.
Absolutely.
Is very important. London is essentially the international insurance market. And if Lloyd's say that the premiums for these ships are now unacceptably high, that's going to interfere with shipping.
Yeah,
it's not just the military threat in the Straits of Hormuz.
Yeah, no, that's the point. A commercial ship, the bar is crossed.
Yeah.
Now, the question is how long being above the bar persists, and 9% move in the oil price will seem small if this lasts for weeks and months. Yeah. It'll suddenly rise more. We'll see.
Well, there's a reasonable chance it won't last that long.
Yeah, we shall see. Peter, thank you. Great to see you as always.
Thanks.